we look at the trends, what's kind of being forecasted into the future, we're going to see a lot more of these battery electric vehicles, the ones that are just electric. And here, Volkswagen is quite aggressive in their strategy to electrify their complete fleet. So is Hyundai. GM made an announcement this week. They're looking at accelerating their path towards electrification. So we're going to see a lot more of that in the light, the light vehicle segment, the passenger vehicle segment. But there's also a tremendous amount of innovation and the pace of change in the commercial side is really coming around. So we're going to see where we're seeing school buses. There's a company that I'll touch on in a second called Lion out of Quebec. Prince Edward Island just purchased 12 electric school buses. We're seeing garbage trucks that are starting to roll out across North America. And those make a tremendous amount of sense. It's a vehicle that stops and starts continuously, which is terrible for fuel mileage. And electric vehicles have something called regenerative braking. So your electric motor helps to slow down the vehicle, and it acts like a generator. It creates electricity and helps put that electricity back into the battery pack. So something like a garbage truck would utilize that technology really well. And we're seeing a lot more smaller cargo vans for last mile delivery. Now, there are still some challenges in the overall space of transportation of goods it's challenging to electrify everything. So long haul trucking and ocean bearing ships are actually a really good match for hydrogen. And some of you might have heard there's a lot of talk of hydrogen these days. And in the passenger, the light vehicle segment, I guess the jury's not out. Personally, I don't think it makes economic sense to have hydrogen in a light duty fleet. But in the heavy duty fleets and long haul trucking and ocean vessels, it does make a tremendous amount of sense. So I was mentioning Ford. I don't know if I had mentioned Ford, but I was saying Ford is one of the automakers that's electrifying pretty aggressively as well. So this is the new van that was just announced. I think it was about a week ago. So it's part of their transit fleet and 100% electric. And they're electrifying their whole lineup, including some manufacturing in Canada. So a lot of these electric vehicles that Ford is producing will be made out of Ontario. So it's pretty exciting. And some of you might have seen the advertisement. So the top left photo here that I have, that was a Ford kind of promo and showcasing their technology. They put 48 F-150s in 10 train carts and pulled it with their electric pickup truck, with one truck. And that represented 1.25 million pounds that truck pulled. So, when we're talking about transitioning towards electrification for our whole systems in our fleets, we're not going back in terms of power and convenience, and it's actually pretty incredible the amount of power and the amount of acceleration we're seeing on the high end. Not on the high end, but on the Teslas anyways. Some of them are incredibly fast, faster than Ferraris, 0 to 100 kilometers an hour, sub 2 seconds. So it's a pretty phenomenal advancement that we're seeing in this space. And this is that company I had mentioned, Lion, out of Quebec. So that's a bit of a manufacturing success story out of Canada. And the demand for these trucks and this platform is just incredible. And here at the bottom left, I have a photo of Toyota and some of their upcoming prototypes. So lots of new cars, lots of new platforms, lots of new, larger segment vehicles are coming out, and electric pickup trucks are coming. We're going to expect around 2022, 2023 to have a whole segment of electric pickup trucks, from Tesla to Ford to Dodge. And Hummer as well has announced one. So it's pretty exciting, and we're starting to see a lot more cooperation and collaboration between manufacturers. It's very expensive to develop a new platform, a new technology that's so different than what they've been building for decades, right? So we're seeing partnerships with Honda and Toyota. We're seeing GM with Nikola. We're seeing Mitsubishi, Renault, Infiniti with Nissan. And I just want to show this little van here. This is Amazon that's bought into the brand Rivian, and Amazon is going to have a very large order of these delivery vehicles, and they've partnered with Rivian. So we hadn't seen this level of collaboration and partnership in the past, and they're really tackling this head on. And so it'll be really interesting to see how that shapes up in the future. But it's really good news for us in terms of lowering costs and getting some efficiencies. So this is what's available right now, and this isn't a complete picture. This is actually just it's whatever I could fit on the slide. There's a lot more available vehicles than that. But what I wanted to show you is that the electric vehicle range has increased dramatically. And if we're looking at the Hyundai Kona, 415 kilometers, the Chevy Bolt, right around that same mark, the Tesla Model 3. So electric vehicles have increased their range dramatically over the last 8 years or so. And as they've increased their range, and that's primarily due to the cost of the batteries going down, we keep hearing the same questions, and I bet you there'll be a question at the end on this. But what happens to the batteries? What happens to the batteries after, and don't you need to replace them? Are they like a cell phone that they die after a couple years? And the good news is they actually last a lot longer than you think. And the experts thought originally as well. So Geotab is a company. It's an analytics data company, and they have a Canadian study or North American study with 6,300 vehicles and 1.8 million days of driving data, and they were able to analyze with each make and model over the years what their battery degradation was. And that means if your vehicle can do, I'm gonna say 200 kilometers. That's a much lower cost, and nowadays most EVs go a lot further than that. But let's say 200 kilometers, and if you're using it 20,000 kilometers a year, after about 6 years, you're expected to have about a 10 to 11% degradation of the battery, right? And what that means is, let's say over 5 years, you would go from 200 kilometers of range to 178 kilometers. Now, the battery works absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It just lost a little bit of capacity. Just like your cell phone, when you purchased it new, you could probably watch videos for longer than after a couple of years. Now, the good news is electric vehicle batteries are built a lot better than cell phones. There's a lot of thermal management, and that's a really key part. Thermal management is making sure that the battery stays stays cool when it's under charging or when it's really hot, and when it's really cold in the winter, that it stays warmer. So it stays in kind of its happy place, and that really makes sure that the battery will last a lot longer. And we actually have some really, really cool innovation coming out of Nova Scotia. It's almost a shame that more Nova Scotians aren't aware of the fantastic work that's happening right here in our backyard. The photo on the top left is Dr. Jeff Dawn out of Dalhousie, and he's got a research partnership with Tesla. Now, just to put in context, Tesla's head office is across the street, literally, from Stanford in California. And they could, they can partner with any research institution in the world, but the only institution they have an agreement with is Dalhousie. And we have some, Jeff Dawn is the absolute expert in this space. And they're looking at his whole lab and his team. They're looking at how do you make sure that these batteries last as long as they can? How do you get 1 million kilometers, 2 million kilometers out of a battery pack, which, if we're comparing it to a gasoline vehicle, it's a whole world apart. This is a huge leap. This is incredible. And Dr. Jeff Dawn is looking at different compositions of chemistry, that every time you charge and discharge, that the battery doesn't lose a micro percentage, so that you can do thousands and thousands of these charge cycles without losing any capacity. They're also looking at removing certain chemistries out of the battery. There's certain materials like cobalt that cost a lot of money that would, there'd be a lot more efficiencies if you replaced it with different minerals. We know that Tesla, through their recent battery day announcements, they're looking at having a battery composed with a lot more nickel, which could come out of Canada. We're a huge producer of nickel. And interestingly, they're innovating in getting their own lithium from the United States. And something that I learned was that the United States has the sixth largest supply of lithium in the world, and they have some mining rights in Nevada. So really cool stuff happening in Dalhousie in terms of pushing battery chemistry, where we're, how we can get longer lasting batteries. But once the batteries are already out, what do we do when that useful life of the battery is no longer appropriate for our needs? So that electric car that could go 200 kilometers, maybe eventually it'll go, after a decade, it'll only go 150 kilometers or 145 kilometers or something. And we say, I actually needed to do 200 kilometers. I think realistically, we're going to see that vehicle be used in a case where somebody doesn't need to drive it far or for a business case. But in any case, if someone's like, I want to switch the battery out, this is Dr. Lucas Swan and his team out of Dalhousie, and they're looking at second use applications for their batteries. And their lab is called the Renewable Energy Storage Lab. And they're doing some really, really cool things in that space. So that battery that can only do 150 kilometers now instead of 200, and we decided to get a brand new battery into that vehicle, they're looking at how can we utilize that for energy storage for the grid. When the wind's blowing in Nova Scotia and we want to be able to capture that, put it into batteries, there's some utility scale applications that we can put those batteries to use for. So really, really cool research happening out of Nova Scotia. So as I was mentioning, battery prices have been dropping tremendously. So we're looking at about, latest figure I heard was 87, so even a little bit more optimistic than this. 87% drop in price since 2010. Now in 2010, 2011, when the Nissan Leaf came out with, it was about 117 kilometer range, the big difference, the cost of the vehicles, in some cases has gone down, but the range has increased tremendously. And that's really, really important for a lot of people. So we're going to dive into numbers a little bit. I was talking about how the electric vehicles are more useful for a broader range of applications, from people on road trip, driving across the country, where, there's a team that just drove across from Vancouver all the way to Nova Scotia in 72 hours in a Tesla, and that includes charging. So it's there's been a lot of progress, but at the end of the day, financials is the biggest barrier to most purchases. And one thing that I didn't mention, that there's so I run the Clean Transportation Department at the Clean Foundation, and I've been involved in the Electric Vehicle Association for quite some time, but I'm also a partner at All EV Canada, and that's an electric vehicle center that does sales, education, and servicing. And one of the reasons behind forming that is the financial aspect of it is quite a big challenge for many, and bringing in certified pre-owned EVs at a lower cost, really helps mitigate that barrier for many. But even if we look at brand new or used, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, these EVs have a lot less maintenance. It's a huge advantage. And Consumer Report came out with a paper not too long ago, in the last couple months, and it said drivers of electric vehicles are saving an average of 50% on maintenance and repair over the life of the vehicle. So 50% of the cost. And the key part for fleets, it's not just that you're saving on maintenance, but it's that you don't have to take that vehicle out of service and shuttle, if you have two vehicles, to drop one off, drive them back. It's taking them out of service is actually a really big, it's a big loss. So the fact that we can keep utilizing our vehicles and keep them in the fleet for a lot longer, because they don't have oil changes, they don't have exhaust leaks, they don't have spark plug changes. There's a whole ton of parts that they don't have, that makes it a lot simpler. And on the left on the graph there, you can see the maintenance cost, and those numbers are from a pretty darn large fleet. So that's the city of New York. They have, I believe, over 2,000 vehicles and over 200 EVs in there. So as I was saying, a lot less parts, but let's contextualize that. And these numbers here, I'm saying 40 moving parts in an electric vehicle motor. It's actually a little bit less, depending. It's, in some vehicles, it's closer to 18. And my numbers for moving parts in a gas engine is actually quite conservative. It's most likely, depending on the vehicle, closer to 5,000 to 8,000 moving parts. in a gasoline car. And this is just a quick example of some of those parts that you won't find on an electric vehicle. It's pretty hard to replace a fuel tank when that doesn't exist, right? So beyond just maintenance, the big advantage of these electric vehicles is your total cost of ownership. It's your running costs. It's not just maintenance, but it's also the fuel that you're putting it in, the energy that you're putting into the vehicle. And the true advantage of electric cars is right there. It's just so much cheaper to run these vehicles. So if we have fleets that have some vehicles that drive a long distance, right, every year, those are the vehicles that will pay themselves back the most aggressively, the quickest, and they make the most financial sense. So if you have a vehicle that drives 3,000 kilometers a year, then you're not making that purchase purely on an economic basis. You're making that purchase for other reasons that are more for potentially marketing, for posing your brand in a certain manner, and doing your part. But if you're looking at a car that does like 25,000 kilometers a year or more, that's when it's like, whoa, these numbers start to make sense. And so I can say it's $2.80 to go the same distance as $11 for a compact car. But we found a way to compare that to gas. So every time you're filling up your gasoline car, you go to the pump, and whatever you've done, 500 kilometers on your car, and you're pumping gas, you can just think to yourself, if I was driving electric, this would cost me 30 cents a liter. Now, it'll depend what you're comparing it to. If you're comparing it to a super efficient car, then it might be higher than that. It might be 38 cents a liter. But if you're comparing it to Dodge Caravan or a bigger, less efficient vehicle, then it's like, it could be 26 cents a liter. It could be 24 cents a liter. So it'll depend on a few factors. But I got our friends at Dunsky to put in some numbers for me to look at what's your total cost of ownership and when does it become more attractive to go towards electric. And I'm going to go into a little bit more details after on how a company can do an analysis on their fleet to see, okay, this is how much mileage I drive. These are the cars that I have. If I were to replace this with an electric, what would my payback be? And what, does it make financial sense? And what are my GHG savings? So we'll go into that in a second. But this slide is very interesting. So it's comparing a compact SUV for a municipality or a fleet, and that price point is a little, it's a little bit higher, and it depends on a few factors, and it's for oh, I just got a question here. Okay, so you can see the payback on a used electric vehicle integrated into a fleet is very aggressive. So in this case, with 25,000 kilometers a year on this vehicle, it's a 2-year payback on that. And then if it was a brand new vehicle, including the incentive, it's a 6-year payback. So again, it'll depend. It could be even better than this. If you have a vehicle that drives 40,000 kilometers a year or 50,000 kilometers a year, like a lot of fleets do, this payback is even more aggressive and makes a lot of sense to switch. So a question I get quite a bit is on emissions. So, in Nova Scotia, we have quite a bit of coal. A lot of people know that there's coal on our grid. So aren't we being hypocrites, if we're driving an electric vehicle that's being powered by coal? And it's pretty easy to go back to some studies and find some data on this. And in fact, currently in Nova Scotia, electric vehicles pollute about 55% less than a comparable gas car. And the really interesting part of that is it's going to get nothing but better. And 55% is quite significant to start with. But in 2007, our grid had 80% coal. And this year, we're about at 49% coal. And it's going down extremely rapidly. And that change is one of the most aggressive decarbonization strategies that we've had across the country. So it's something that we should be quite proud of. And we're going to see a lot more renewable energies integrated into our grid in the near future. There's a lot of new policies and mandates that are forcing municipalities, utilities, the province, and it's coming from a variety of levels that say, okay, we need to decarbonize our electricity sector. So in fact, your electric vehicle right now today pollutes 55% less, but as you keep driving it, it's going to get cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. It's going to pollute less and less and less. And the exact opposite is true for a gas car. So the day you drive your gas car is the day it's most efficient, but over time, as the engine wears itself slightly, it loses some efficiencies, and often we'll see, although for fleets not so much, because they're maintained often in a more rigorous manner than with private ownership. But that check engine light that's on, that's often an emissions-based system that's fault. It could be a sensor, it could be all sorts of things, but your vehicle ends up polluting more over time. So in Nova Scotia, lots of wind, lots of potential around tidal energy, and we're integrating more and more solar into our system. And there's before I change slide, there's a lot of future potential in this space where right now Nova Scotia Power has a really interesting pilot program for smart charging. So they get to control when your vehicle charges, and and by the way, you charge at night most of the time for I'd say almost every single EV owner. They just plug it in at night and then it charges in the morning. It's fully charged. Now the utility gets to control if they turn it on or off for a little bit at night. And imagine if you have these renewable energies that are intermittent, like wind. The wind is blowing and you want to make sure you're using as much of it as you can. So then you would go and turn on all the EV chargers. Or maybe the wind dies down, and instead of turning on a natural gas peaker plant or something like that, you just turn off the charging station. So there's a lot of really cool innovation that's coming into the space in the near future. All right, so charging. We get a lot of questions around this as well, and it's actually not that complicated. I'm going to try to make it as simple as I can. Level 1 is an electrical wall outlet. You just plug your car into a wall outlet. It charges really slowly, but it works. On a plug-in hybrid vehicle, the ones that have a gasoline engine and a battery that plug in, those, they'll go between 25 kilometers and 85 kilometers is the typical range. And if you think of, overnight, it'll actually replenish that battery completely on a level 1. Now, a level 2 is what you'll have at your home or at a gym or at a grocery store, at a library, and they'll add about 30 kilometers of range per every hour it's plugged in. And that's what we'll find for all applications. The only time we would want a level 3 station, and those look like big fridges, and they have like a pantry next to it. It's all electrical box. They're very expensive. They're very expensive pieces of infrastructure, and usually you'll find those on the highway. You'll find those between cities, and that's just for a quick stop to add a bit of energy to your battery to get you to your destination. Minister Momberket and I, last year, we decided to drive to Sydney, and we wanted to showcase our electric vehicle, and we made 2 stops. And I'll just show them on the map here. We stopped here, and we stopped here for about 10, 15 minutes each time. And the goal when you're going long distances, it's not like a gasoline car where you're trying to fill the battery up to the brim and then you leave. In fact, it's the total opposite. So imagine owning a gas station at your house and your gas at your own gas station is cheaper. You certainly wouldn't be going out to other gas stations. You just charge at home, or you just fill it up at home. And our electric vehicles, we always joke around, it takes 5 seconds to charge, right? You plug it in, you click it, you walk away, charges overnight, and you unclick it. The fast chargers do help on longer distances, and they'll usually add about 250 kilometers of range per hour it's plugged in. Now, there are a lot faster chargers than that are rolling out, and there's a lot of innovation in that space right now, where we're seeing, the Porsche Taycan. Even regular electric vehicles are able to charge at a much faster rate, and we're seeing this innovation in the last couple of years, and we're going to continue seeing that these cars can, go a lot further, but they can charge a lot quicker. And the most dominant automaker in that space is Tesla. Their superchargers, can add 1,000 kilometers of range per hour. So you'd be at the supercharger for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and get a really significant amount of charge. And you can see the dark blue dots all over this map here. That's your level 2 charging stations. So when you're at you're at a park, you're at Parks Canada, or at a hotel, or at a gym, and you're going to be there for quite some time, then you just charge up overnight or for long periods of time. All right, so winter. How do these EVs fare in winter? A lot of people's cell phones, again, they don't last as long when it's really, really cold out? Well, you know, a couple facts to start with. Our winters are actually not that bad. You know, Norway, actually 66% of new car sales are electric vehicles in Norway. Now, Nova Scotia, we're nowhere near that. We're not even at half of a single percent of new car sales being electric. But it's not winters that are holding us back. So it's primarily policies that help drive that level of sale. So a couple really neat things about electric cars in winter. You just use your phone to tell it to turn on and to heat the vehicle up, and then the car like warms itself up, you hop in, and it's guilt-free. You're not like idling for 5-6 minutes. And even if you didn't have the chance to tell your phone, hey, I'm leaving in 5 minutes, you just hop in, you turn the heater on. It's like a hair dryer. It's a resistive heater for the majority of the electric vehicles. So the heat's immediate. Whereas a gas car, you got to idle or you got to drive for, you know, 4 kilometers or something before you start getting some heat. And there's a couple strategies to help minimize the amount of energy that we're going to lose over winter. And I'll try to explain that. So our Bolt Bolt is the car that's pictured right here, Zevi. At 21 degrees Celsius, it's the happiest. And that's not just us thinking of that. That's data that we pulled from Geotab. And it can go a lot further than its rated 385 kilometer range. But in winter, it doesn't go quite as far, right? And there's a tool that if somebody, I'll maybe throw in the chat afterwards if anyone's interested, they can put in the vehicle model and year, and then you can slide the temperature and see how it affects your range in summer and winter. But there are ways that you can minimize how much energy it's gonna lose in winter. So when it's plugged into the grid, you tell it to warm up. It's using the electricity from the grid, not its battery. And electricity is quite cheap, right? So you know, you don't have to feel guilty about that at all. It's gonna heat up the whole vehicle. You hop in, and then you just turn on the heated seats and the heated steering wheel, and it takes a lot less energy to keep the vehicle warm and the driver and passenger comfortable versus hot air blowing. That takes quite a bit more energy. Now, you can see the arrows that are pointing down on that platform. That's the cutaway of a Chevy Bolt. Electric vehicles in general are significantly heavier, but they have a lower center of gravity. So you can see where that battery is. It's in the lowest part of the chassis, at the very lowest. So imagine a car that's actually a little bit higher off the ground. It'll handle like a sports car because its center of gravity is really low. It won't teeter-totter much, right? It won't be tilting. And electric vehicles utilizing, you know, by the nature of electric motors, they're a lot more granular in how they can control the power that's being applied, right? So it's a lot smoother, it's a lot more precise. Traction control is a lot more immediate, and you know, we see these electric vehicles, whether front wheel drive or rear wheel drive, have no problem in winter. Of course, it's all about having really good winter tires. But these electric vehicles tend to have phenomenal traction in winter, including rear-wheel drive Teslas. Again, it's that lower center of gravity and that weight being distributed evenly in the car. It makes a really big difference. So I want to talk about safety. We're talking about winter, slippery conditions. What about safety in these electric cars? And I just want to show you an advantage of the lower center of gravity. So we're going to go at a couple different speeds here. So that's pretty incredible. So the lower the center of gravity, the more stable the vehicle is. And now rollovers only happen in about 2.1% of accidents, yet they account for 35% of fatalities. So rollovers are a really big, you know, they're not a challenge, they're really dangerous, right? Like you have really high odds of dying. And so the lower your center of gravity, the better it is to handle those types of situations and to help mitigate that. So, oh, did I skip a slide? No. So how do we get an organization to transition, right? And so it's about understanding the benefits. So there's operational savings. We've already gone over that. It's total cost of ownership. And there's other benefits that aren't as monetary, but they're very, very important. So when I write conscientious achievers, what I mean is retaining your workforce. And we're seeing this more now in the younger workforce and millennials, that they actually really care about working for an organization that meets their personal values. And we're seeing a lot of them, the conscientious achievers, those that actually really jump into their work and they overperform, but they also have, pretty strong moral values that they want to make sure is aligned. And we're seeing a lot more employee turnover, in these last couple decades than we did 30, 40 years ago, where somebody would stay in their same position for their lifetime, their whole career, 40 years, right? So now we're seeing a lot more turnover, and I think employees are looking to get kind of that meaning out of it. So it's a way to retain employees, and we all know how expensive employee turnover is. There's also showing community leadership in your space, showing that your company is able to adapt quickly. They're embracing change, and that they're not staying stale, and they're meeting some sustainability goals. And we're seeing Halifax. So Halifax has a 2050 goal of being net zero, and the city can do a lot of initiatives on their own. But at the end of the day, they need all businesses and participants to jump in, dive in, and do their part. And it's a very interesting initiative that we're supporting. And so all organizations need to jump on board and to get involved. So this is one of the very easy ways to do that. And Clean is looking at developing some tools to help these fleets get a sense of the numbers, and because personal vehicle purchases, I'm scrolling through this here, personal vehicle purchases are very emotional, right? Like we buy a car because we like it, it's the style that we like, it's a color that we like, it has a feature that we like. But when we're purchasing fleets, it's a lot more numerical. It's an analysis. What makes sense? What's the ROI on this? How is this going to fit the needs of my company? So we're hoping to get some funding to develop these resources to be able to analyze a whole fleet, and to help give all the data to a company to say, okay, this makes a lot of sense. So the first step is this fleet analysis. There's also a right sizing analysis. So imagine if you have a pickup truck, but it's being used to go get some coffee and to shuttle people around. Well, first of all, that's your return on investment on that is not good, right? You don't need to be driving a truck for that. And there's a lot of applications where the users of the fleet really like pickups, right? So they want them and they use that pickup a lot more, but it doesn't mean it makes financial sense for your organization to be doing that. So right sizing is making sure you have the vehicles that are appropriate for the task. And when you're looking at electrification, it's replacing some of those cars that aren't the right fit to an electric that starts to make sense, right? When we look at that chart earlier that said that the 2-year payback on a used one or a 6-year payback on a new, well, imagine if we were to replace a pickup truck that was just not used for the right thing, put it with an electric vehicle, your payback on that when you're comparing the gas and the maintenance from a pickup truck versus an electric car, the payback is incredibly quick, right? So it's making sure it fits quite well. Now, car sharing, my point number 3 on there, some of you might be confused as to why that's there. We're seeing a lot of municipalities do this. There's 10 in Quebec, there's several in New Brunswick, there's Vancouver and Saanich in British Columbia. So municipalities that are converting their fleets to electric are then choosing to make the car share with the community, and where they can book ahead of time and say, okay, I want the car in the evenings and weekends. So not during work hours, but evenings and weekends. And we're seeing some organizations do the same thing with their staff. They're saying this is a corporate fleet, but we're going to say, okay, whether it's free or whether there's a small charge to it, employees can take the cars in the evenings, and it helps families that have one vehicle kind of get around a little bit easier without having to purchase a second vehicle. Now, for those municipalities and businesses that do convert their fleet to electric, internal training with your staff is crucial. That's I think where we've seen a lot of mistakes, where a company's just purchased an electric car and they threw it in the fleet and just said, okay, there's a new car. All right. What we're seeing is it's a new technology. There's resistance to it. Without understanding it, without trying it, without somebody being there to guide them through it, often we'll see that one car not get utilized as much because there's that kind of fear of the unknown. The organizations that did do training, we're seeing that the electric cars, when they had buy-in from the staff, were being utilized way more. They had way more mileage at the end of the year than the other vehicles. And this is where Clean can comes in. If you'd like, we'd be happy to come in and do a presentation, bring a whole fleet of electric vehicles, and get all of the staff behind the wheel and experience it and get excited. We'll bring a Tesla. You know, if an employee has an opportunity to drive a Tesla, they usually get quite excited. And then they understand that that Chevy Bolt actually drives in many ways quite similarly. It's just as responsive, it's exciting, it's actually really fun and heats up right away. And then when we have employee buy-in, you know, that transition's a lot easier and high utilization, and you end up paying the car back. Your ROI is even better. And lastly, we're seeing a lot of companies, you know, that are doing those steps, that are embracing it and making it part of their brand, of their marketing, right? So that's another, you know, non-numerical number, but if you're able to attract your clients and who you're serving to say, hey, we have this exciting vehicle where it's part of your brand, and then internally it's also part of kind of an exciting change within your company. So I have a couple slides from Geotab, and they're doing, and I have some slides from Dunsky in here as well. And it's about those organizations that do those analysis. And I won't read through this too much, but at the end of the day, it's really helping you find the best fit for your fleet. And it's looking at the lifetime costs and the savings, and also your pollution reduction, right? So for a lot of organizations, tracking your GHGs and how much you're emitted and how much you've mitigated, how much you've saved is really important. So this kind of, it's data driven and can help you with that. And a lot of the questions that we get from fleet managers, and, you know, does it fit the task that I have? I'm just going to roll through these pretty quickly here. And of course, it's a bit more complicated with large fleets. How do we charge them? What's the best way to do it? And again, it's best to engage with organizations that are quite familiar with this and get an analysis and see, okay, you need 4 chargers, and with your current electrical panel, this is the cheapest way to do it that will serve your needs. And again, apologies about a lot of words on these slides. I try to keep it a little bit more simple. This is from a study with Dunsky, with New Brunswick Power, and they analyzed their fleet. And at the end of the day, 94% reduction in greenhouse gases, and they would have a fleet-wide savings of $1 million if they switched to electric for their fleet. And the interesting part is, you know, 91% of their vehicles and their usage matched, you know, with EVs in terms of range. And then 94% of the duty cycles, you know, meaning when the vehicle is being used and not being used, matches with when the vehicle would be charged. So super high numbers. There might be a few cars out of the whole fleet that could remain gas, and they could become plug-in hybrids or hybrids or just efficient gas cars, but that the large bulk of it can be electrified, and there's some really significant savings with that. So lastly, there's a great website called evassist.ca, and that's a one-window resource for all electric vehicle information. Really extensive, frequently asked questions on batteries, on, you know, charging in winter, charging station maps, road trips in Nova Scotia, available vehicles. It's all found there, and it's a great resource for that. So that ends it for me. I'd love to open up to Q&As and see if anybody has any good questions.
Wow, thanks, Jeremy. That was awesome. Really, really interesting presentation. Thanks so much. I was writing questions down, and as I was writing questions down, the next slide answered the questions. It was like you're reading my mind. So thanks so much. Great presentation. Lots of interesting stuff there. So well done. As we guessed, there was going to be some questions there. So a lot of questions here. So I'll dive right in from our participants. So you kind of mentioned about winters in Canada and specifically with Nova Scotia, but with electric vehicles, how will a car be heated, and what impact does it have on the battery vehicle range, et cetera? Is there a propane heater, for example?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, if we're looking at light duty fleets, so we're looking at passenger cars, there's no fossil fuels, you know, in that car. There's a little bit of oil in the gearbox, but that's it, and that doesn't need to be flushed or serviced. So there's no issues with heating the car. It's using, depending on the electric vehicle, it'll either be a resistive heater like a hair dryer, source of heat, or a heat pump, which is a bit more efficient in winter. And we see like the Hyundai Kona and the Kia Soul that have those heat pumps. They'll be a little bit more efficient in winter. Now, in terms of impact, I really encourage you to, just if you're able to write this down, Google Geotab electric vehicle temperature tool. Electric vehicle temperature tool from Geotab, and they have this awesome platform, and you can slide the little slider for the temperature and see how it will impact your range. And winter does impact the vehicle, and I think it's pretty fair to say, you can lose 35% of your range in the winter. But again, what I tell everyone is, we're in this mindset that like, I need to go 1,000 kilometers per gas tank. But in reality, I fill up every 2 weeks, or, whatever, every week or 2.5 weeks. In reality, with an electric car, it's especially with the fleet, it's the ABCs, always be charging. And so you just leave the car plugged in. There's no harm to the car. You can set it at 90% of its charge level. That's where the battery's the happiest. If you leave your car at 100% battery all the time, the battery's not as happy. So we always keep it at 90%. And then if I know that I'm driving really far, I'm going on a trip to Moncton, I'll just go on my phone or in the car, and I'll just say 100% of the battery, and then I'm good to go. And in winter, that makes a lot of sense, as our range is a little bit less. I hope that answers that question in terms of how the vehicle is impacted. And again, heated seats, heated steering wheel take a lot less energy than the cabin heater. So it's a couple tips on how to maximize that range.
Oh, that's great. Perfect. So next question we have here, what are the costs to the user of the battery charge at various charging stations?
That's a great question. So I'm going to use our Chevy Bolt as an example. It costs us about, I think it's about like $10, maybe $11 to charge the vehicle up, which is, around a third to a quarter of the cost of gasoline. And when we go to fast charging stations, though, it is more expensive. That infrastructure is really expensive to install and to charge so quickly. And it's hard to really understand how much electricity those chargers provide. It's really significant. That tends to be about, I think it's like $15 an hour on average. Some are a bit less, some are a little bit more in other provinces. We're actually in a pretty good place here in Nova Scotia, $15 an hour, and the car charges up. And again, the idea is not to fully charge it there. It's just to charge you enough until you get to your final destination. And this is a part that I didn't dive in originally in the presentation, but charging is not a constant. It's not like a gasoline car that you just pump. If the battery is completely discharged, it'll charge faster than if it's almost full. If the battery's cold, it won't charge as quick. So there's a lot of innovation that we're seeing out of manufacturers now, and I'll use Tesla as an example again. You put in your destination, and it tells you, okay, you should stop at this charging station for whatever, 10 minutes. But it's going to heat the battery pack to the optimal temperature to be able to accept the charge as quick as it possibly can. So we're seeing a lot of this kind of automated learning, machine learning, and they're integrating into the vehicles to make sure that we can charge more efficiently, more rapidly. And so we're going to start seeing a lot more of that in all of the automakers, but right now Tesla has got the upper hand on it.
Right. So cool. Really interesting stuff. So next question from one of our participants here. On the e-map that you showed earlier that identified all the charging stations, are they all public charging stations? Are they private, or is there a combination of both private and public? And how many public stations in Nova Scotia?
Awesome. It's a great question. So a couple questions within that. Now, there's a website called plugshare.com. And I should have put that in a link somewhere. So plugshare.com. And that's the one resource that we tell EV owners and EV drivers to check, because we hear often, I see gas stations everywhere. I don't know where the electric vehicle charging stations are, and there must be none in this province. Well, there's a lot, but how do you find them? So plugshare.com has a live map, and those stations are public. Even if they're a private station, the only reason they'd be on that map is that they're open to having members of the public charge there. So those are all open to the public on that map. Again, plugshare.com. And how many public stations are there in Nova Scotia? So the level 2 stations, the type of stations that you have at your home, at a library, or things like that. There's about 135 in the province, and there's about 22 fast charging stations. The fast charging stations, again, those are the ones that when you're driving to Moncton, if you're driving to PEI or whatnot, you would stop along the way, and I always time my washroom breaks and my food breaks and coffee breaks with charging. I stop, plug it in, I go get a coffee, washroom, I'm back in the car after 15 minutes, and off I go. So I find driving with an electric vehicle actually gives a bit of cadence and makes me a bit more relaxed when I drive really long distances, but it hasn't prevented me from getting to my destination.
Great. Okay. So another question here. Electric vehicles seem to be an area which, electric vehicles seem to be an area where vehicle needs to be attached to the internet. Is this going to be another monthly charge by an ISP?
Yeah, so internet service provider is what I'm guessing that is. So the cars, so no, often they have their own data source. They have their own internet packages, and that's if they need that. And that's more like Teslas. If you're charging or if you're eating a sandwich, you can stream Netflix. It's pretty incredible. You have access to the internet all through the big screen in the car. But you don't have to, you know, that's premium connectivity. I think it's $10 a month or something like that. And then you can stream music and Spotify and all that stuff. Now that's not necessary. Our Chevy Bolt, we can, we can purchase a data package if we wanted to stream the internet from the car and have the car be like a mobile hotspot, but absolutely not. There's no extra payments for that. Some of them have extra payments for using their app. So if you want to be able to control the car from your phone, there's some fees, sometimes it's around the $10 to $14 a month. But that, again, that's an option. I'm going to jump into the second question, Chris, if I may. So Liam, so, depreciation seems higher with the major brands, Nissan, Chevy, and Hyundai. Do you have any data or research on EVs versus ICE, and ICE means internal combustion engine depreciation rates? So very good question. I think we're going to see a pretty interesting reversal of that. So we've seen historically, like if we're looking at 2010, 2011, 2012, all around that era, it was the first wave of electric vehicles. It was the first time they were coming out, and they had very limited range, and they had faster battery degradation curves, right? They weren't using thermal management. They weren't keeping the batteries in their happy place temperature-wise, which helps them last a lot longer. So those cars had more limited range. A lot more innovations was coming out at an extremely rapid rate, right? Like now cars have, 3-4 times the range that they had 8 years ago. So of course, those vehicles at the very start depreciate a lot quicker. But if we look at a Chevy Bolt, let's say 383 kilometers, there'll be newer iterations of that car coming out that'll charge faster, that will go further. But at the end of the day, that car that can do that can fit in most people's lifestyles. And we're seeing that battery, the one thing I didn't mention earlier is on the degradation. Geotab is expecting the newer wave of technology that's in market right now, that the batteries will last 16 years, which is longer than the average lifespan of an electric vehicle, of a vehicle, full stop, in Nova Scotia. So the batteries will outlive the chassis of the car. So now that we're seeing this kind of stability and the data behind it, I think we're going to see a lot of high mileage EVs still fetch a really high price. But Liam is correct in the sense that there has been a pretty aggressive depreciation on certain models. Now, if you look at the Tesla Model 3, and you look at the depreciation of that, it's incredible. It doesn't depreciate at all. That car has kept its value more than any other car. It's amazing. So if you were to compare a Honda Accord or, a BMW 5 Series, a luxury car, with a Tesla Model 3, you'll see that, my God, that Tesla Model 3 makes a ton of financial sense, especially if you add in the residual value after 5 or 6 years, right? So it's model specific. It's now that we're kind of a new wave of technology. If we've looked in the last, let's say, 3 years, technologies, advance enormously in what's available in market. So I think we're going to start seeing high mileage EVs still fetch a pretty high price, and we're going to see that switch over time.
Great. So I'm just going to jump over to the chat here because we had a couple comments from my good buddy Dwayne Primo here at Northern Business Intelligence. So he just wanted to let our listeners know, and yourself know, Jeremy, that you mentioned a couple times about Geotab in the presentation and when you're chatting there. Just Dwayne would be appreciate if we let our participants know that Northern Business Intelligence is a local Geotab partner who can assist with electric vehicle suitability assessment for their fleets. So I'm not sure if you knew that, but something that Dwayne wanted to let our members know.
Absolutely. So we've been in discussions with Dwayne and going through his firm for data analysis, and we've put in some grant applications to be able to really use his products and that he resells from Geotab, and to be able to do those analysis. So super happy to have Dwayne jump in and mention that.
Great. So I think you might have mentioned this in one of the links, and excuse me if I'm asking again. What's your source for the Nova Scotia location of the charger map? Did you mention that in one of the links?
Yeah, plugshare.com is the root source of it, but the website I showed earlier, evassist.ca, let me see if I can slide back to it here. Yeah, evassist.ca has that map, has a link to PlugShare, and you can see all the charging stations, not only in Nova Scotia, but in Newfoundland and PEI and all that. Okay,
great. And in that site, is there a plan to put like up and coming charging stations across Nova Scotia?
Yeah. So they'll usually look like a little wrench. It'll be an icon that has a wrench, and that usually means under construction. Right. So upcoming stations.
Great. And I should mention to all our participants that we are recording this, so anyone can go back. But we're also going to send out an email with all these links that Jeremy's mentioned during the presentation, so that way you can reference those links as well. So last question here, and then I'll wrap it up. From one of our guests, how are auto insurance viewing electric vehicles with new insurance products emerging?
Yeah, great question again. So we're seeing companies like TD Insurance give a rebate for electric vehicles. We're seeing CAA, specifically in Newfoundland, give a really significant rebate for using electric vehicles. We're seeing Tesla working on launching their own insurance for their vehicles. So we are seeing a lot more innovation in that space. And so if you get an electric vehicle, it's worth shopping around a little bit. You'll most likely get some sort of a discount because of it.
Awesome. Great. Well, listen, Jeremy, we're out of time. I mean, it was a great presentation. If you've been able to see through the chat, some of the comments there, everyone was really appreciative of your time today. So thanks so much. You did a great job. Really interesting stuff.
My pleasure. All right. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody.
So I'm just going to wrap it up here. So thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar. I'm looking forward to doing some more research myself on electric vehicles and how we can help reduce our carbon footprint. So reaching out to our members as well to join us today for our virtual Road to Recovery Summit. So that's free for all chamber members. We'll be discussing how our region has been navigating COVID-19 and what we can do to continue to support our business community. We have a great lineup of speakers from local small business owners to national speakers and economists. This webinar has been recorded, as I mentioned, and will be featured shortly on our YouTube channel. And I just want to wish everyone a great day and great end to your week. Thanks so much.